Hi, this is Josh Kulp. We are learning Daf Shevui. We are on Masechet Kiddushin Daf Yod Gimmel. And I want to talk about two issues here, like I did last week. And the first is actually related to something I talked about last week. That is the issue of Kiddushay Safek. And this week I want to talk about what's the ramification of cases where rabbis have to adjudicate whether or not something is Kiddushin or not. In other words, I want to ask the question, what happens, or why would a case come in front of rabbis, assuming that some cases of Kiddushin did come in front of rabbis? What would they be at? What kinds of cases would these be? Now, I'm not talking about the particulars of the case. The first case that we have in this page is a man that betroths with a bunch of myrtles. And the question is that worth a prutza or not? Now, I want to emphasize over here, this is not going to happen if the couple decides that they definitely want to be Mekudesha. There's no reason for the rabbi to have to fear that, deal with that issue, because they could always just redo the Kiddushin. So, Reuven tries to betroth Leah. We're not sure if the Kiddushin are valid, and they come in front of the rabbis, and both Reuven and Leah want to be married to each other, want to be betrothed, so he could just redo the Kiddushin. No problem. There's no real ramifications of a rabbi's decision there, whether was the original Kiddushin valid or not. The bigger issue comes if she or he does not want to be betrothed. So in other words, she comes in front of the rabbis and says, I was betrothed, and now look, he's out there and he's not treating me as if I was betrothed. Or even worse, she says, I wasn't betrothed, I didn't agree to being betrothed, or I agreed, but it wasn't worth a pruta, so it didn't really count. And he says, no, I betrothed you. If the rabbis decide that she's betrothed, then she's going to need a get. And decide she's not betrothed, she's not going to need a get. In other words, the cases are always going to come in front of a rabbinic court when one of the parties says that the betrothal is not valid. There are never really going to be a lot of ramifications if both of the parties agree that the Kiddushin was valid, or that they want to be married. The same thing with the second case where he steals something from her and tries to betroth her with it. That's only going to be an issue if she claims, I didn't accept the betrothal. I wasn't trying to be married to you. If she says, look, I'm trying to be married to you, at worst, we could just redo the Kiddushin in a better way, which really, Kiddushin is a very, very easy act to do. There's not really any problem with redoing it. So that's always important to keep in mind. These cases, if they really are accurate reflections of reality and stories of rabbis really adjudicating these are cases where one party says that they didn't want to be betrothed. Now, the second thing I think is really kind of neat on this page is that the second half of the page, we see what happens when rabbis gather together to remember each other, to remember somebody who has died. And so when we hear that Rav Asi dies, a very famous rabbi, the rabbis gather together to collect his sayings. And this is one way in which probably the sayings of masters were preserved. They were preserved by the students, and when somebody died, we hear this not infrequently in the Talmud, when somebody died, everybody would gather together their sayings. Note, though, two things. One is they wouldn't just list the sayings, they would discuss them, they would argue about them, they would refute them, they would raise difficulties on them. In other words, they became a topic of learning, and that topic of learning seems to have adhered itself to their statement, and then at some later point been put into the appropriate Masechet. Assumingly, for sure, Rav Asi said a lot more statements than just the two that are mentioned here. I'm sure when the rabbis gathered together to collect his statements, they didn't just say two of them, they probably said lots of them. Those statements have been strewn throughout the rest of the Gemara. It happens to be that the ones that we have here are only about relevant to women or to Kiddushin. And so you can see here a little bit of the process of how the Talmud was put together. People gathered together, remembered the words of their predecessors by their names, and eventually, and then started to remember those collections. But eventually, those pieces of collections got scattered to the appropriate places in the Talmud that more appropriate for their discussion, because it's easier to find something when you know the topic, when things are divided by topic as opposed to by names. We see that in the Mishnah too. There are two Masechta largely organized by name, Avot and Eduyot. but the rest of the Mishnah is divided by topic, or mostly by topic, which makes it easier to find whatever you're looking for.